Welcome to Beyond the Numbers, where we talk about the human side of financial advice and having the right support can make all the difference in reaching your life goals. I'm your host, Zoe Pearson, Head of Marketing for Asia and the Middle East at St James's Place. I work closely with our advisors and our clients across the region, so I get to see firsthand how the right planning can make even the most complex situations feel manageable. I'm also a long-term expat myself and St James's Place client, having lived outside the UK for the last decade. Today's episode is for anyone navigating the complexities of a global lifestyle. Whether you're an expatriate, an entrepreneur, you're working overseas, and you have assets and obligations in multiple jurisdictions. Cross-border wealth planning can be challenging, and the rules can get tricky. But with the right advice, it's not just manageable, it can present opportunities. Joining me today is someone who knows this space inside out. Stuart Rankin, financial advisor and senior partner in our Hong Kong office. Stuart specialises in helping internationally mobile clients plan for their future, using his expertise to simplify complex situations. He's passionate about helping clients live the lives that they thought might not have been possible. Thank you so much for joining us. I've got a few questions for you, but I just wanted to kick off with probably a little bit more of a simple one. Can you tell me a little bit about your career journey? What made you become a financial advisor? Why do you love it?
Thank you, Zoe. It's a pleasure to be here. So my career journey as a financial advisor kicked off 15 years ago when I first moved to Shanghai. When I got a job as a trainee within a financial advisory practice based in Shanghai. I spent 5 years in Shanghai working with expatriates, specifically British expatriates, navigating the complexities between the UK and living in China. I then moved to Beijing, where I helped to establish our satellite office there. I spent 4 years in Beijing and then moved to Hong Kong just at the beginning of 2020 and have been working here ever since.
Oh, wow. I actually never knew that you joined as a trainee. That's something new. A trainee 15 years ago in Shanghai. Must have been some exciting times.
Indeed. I was an associate before Oliver. So, starting no understanding, no knowledge really of how everything worked. New country, other side of the world, different language. It was good fun. Certainly a very steep learning curve.
What inspired you to take on, I guess, those more complex clients, the people with those multi-jurisdictional assets? What made you want to get into that space more?
I think, as with a lot of things, you kind of fall into something. So it wasn't necessarily well thought out and planned in advance. But I think when I first started working in Shanghai, I was a 24-year-old, fairly fresh-faced and green behind the ears. And I'd kind of decided that I didn't have the kind of gravitas and the experience in terms of, I guess, years in the game. So what I could do to try and upskill myself quickly was to study and to learn. So I'd know the most essentially and be able to use that to help clients and help to identify advice areas that could be beneficial.
Yeah, because you're UK qualified as well, right? In addition to being Hong Kong qualified.
Absolutely. And that came around quite early in my career journey where I decided that given that I was working with British expatriates predominantly, that I should get UK qualified and really understand the ins and outs so I could really just give good advice. Obviously, the more you learn, the more you know, the more you realise you don't know. But equally, you can start to see opportunities, whereas in the past, you take things as face value. I think when you get more of a deeper understanding of any area, but in my case, cross-border planning, you start to see opportunities of things clients could do or do differently to help them in their situation. And really since then, it's been kind of lifelong learning of continually learning new things, taking more qualifications, and just staying up to date with the constant change of tax rules and different laws and regulations, and kind of managed to fashion out a bit of a niche on that cross-border planning space and really built my business around that.
And say someone comes in to see you, what is the most satisfying bit of it? So you're coming in maybe with a worry or a concern. What's your objective when they come into that meeting? I
think there's kind of two areas. So personally, I like problem solving. So being able to solve that problem gives me some satisfaction. But the bigger satisfaction, I think, comes from the impact you can have on people's lives, essentially. I think a lot of the people that come to see us will come in with a worry or a concern of some description, not knowing exactly where they are or They may well be earning well as a professional when they've been putting money aside, but they're not sure what that actually means in the context of their longer term ambitions and fundamentally whether they're going to be okay in the future. The planning process that we go through with people kind of gives them a clear idea of where they are now and a path to follow to allow them to meet all of their life objectives and goals. Often retirement's involved in there, but educating kids, whatever that might mean for them. And mapping that out and then staying with people side by side, walking that path and allowing them to get to where they want to be and seeing their mindset change from a place of worry to kind of peace of mind and security that they're on the right path is very rewarding.
I guess for most people, actually, those objectives are the same, whether you're moving countries or whether you're staying in one country, educating your children, retiring when you want to, living in the home you want. It's universal. Absolutely.
And I think the kind of broad brush is the same, but what retirement means is very different for everybody. We only get one life. And so it's really important to make the most of the time that we do have because we don't know how long we're going to be around for. And so I think from a planning process, it really starts with understanding what does a great life look like for that individual, because it will differ. Your idea of a fantastic retirement will differ to mine, will differ to somebody else's. So we start off with understanding what does great look like, and then we can build a plan around that. So whilst retirement is important, it's what does retirement look like? What does it mean? And why does that matter? So that we can deliver bespoke advice. And then I guess that's kind of true for most people. They're aiming towards a similar goal. I guess the challenge living overseas and opportunity, I think, as you mentioned earlier, is that on top of that kind of universal planning priority, we need to layer the complexities of living internationally, possibly having assets in different jurisdictions, planning to move between different places. And that kind of adds just that extra layer on level of complexity to be planned for. So living the best life you possibly can within the confines of death and taxes is kind of your role, I guess. Yeah, we can't avoid death, but I think we can do what we can to try and minimise the taxes. Yeah. When you're working with people who live and work across borders, what tends to be the biggest headache that you're finding when people come in? We mentioned taxes there. Is it inheritance? Is it taxation? Is it just day to day? What do you find is the biggest headache people are coming in with? Often people come in, it's not necessarily with a specific issue that they know they need to fix. Sometimes it is. Often if people are moving countries, particularly repatriating to the UK, that is often a trigger for people to think that taking advice would be useful. A lot of our Asia Middle East clients, typically based in Hong Kong, Singapore or Dubai, all countries or jurisdictions that don't have taxes on investment income and gains. So the UK, somewhat less tax friendly. And so I think a lot of people are mindful of, they've not had to think about that tax planning aspect living in these overseas jurisdictions. Moving back to the UK, it's something that they understand needs to be put in place. So I think that's a challenge that people are mindful of. I think in addition to that, there's often areas that people don't know are issues. Often you don't know what you don't know. And so on the surface, you may have a plan or a platform that looks like it does a good job. But actually, when you get under the hood a bit, you can find that maybe it doesn't. For example, somebody that's left the UK and moved to Hong Kong may have a investment plan or platform that they've set up in the UK with UK funds, which were perfectly fine and suitable when they were living in the UK. When they leave the UK and are no longer liable to UK tax, holding on to those funds can often give them an unneeded tax liability. So simply moving to a non-UK version can result in a net tax benefit for them and more money in their pocket, which can then go towards those future lifestyle goals and either help them to get there quicker or provide a better lifestyle when they actually get there. So actually, reality is you should probably speak to somebody before you make any of these cross-border decisions or moves. Actually, you're better to do it when you're still in situ, so you understand what the right option is. 100%. I think often, particularly moving back to the UK, if you wait till you've made the move, often it's too late to actually do anything about it. I had a client who moved back to the UK before they got in touch with me, and it turned out that they were planning to sell a property. And if they'd have done that before they moved, they'd have saved over £100,000 in capital gains tax by being a non-resident. Whereas as it was, they'd already become UK resident and that opportunity was gone. So there's a pound and pence impact of delaying that advice. A lot of people are put off about getting advice or perhaps have a bit of
a bit of a concern about going in and speaking to somebody. It's the classic thing about talking about money, right? In your experience, why do people wait, and what happens when they actually do make that step?
It's a good question. I think there are numerous reasons why people don't seek out advice. One, it could just be they're super busy, living a busy career plus family plus trying to maintain a social life doesn't leave a lot of time necessarily for focusing on finances. And so often it falls to the bottom of people's lists of priorities. Other people maybe have some concerns but don't want to face it. There's an element of denial there, sort of the ostrich approach of putting head in the sand and ignoring it as if it's going to go away. There's normally a trigger at some point that causes them to then kind of look back at it again. Sometimes people feel that they don't have enough wealth to work with an advisor. So ironically, the advisor's job is to accumulate that wealth, but that often puts people off. And often there's a misunderstanding or a lack of understanding of actually what's an advisor's job there to do. I think a lot of people think it's simply to manage money. It's simply to run investment funds or recommend what's a good investment that's going to make money. And the real role of an advisor is far broader. You need assets, investments, whatever they might be, to power a plan to get to where you want to be. But actually, it's that wider holistic looking at what are your objectives, how are you going to get there, and then what are the steps you need to take to do it. Often that's the more valuable aspect rather than just the fund management side. But a lot of people see financial advisors maybe as they were back in the 90s when it was much more about selling investment funds. In terms of the impact of taking advice, I think the biggest one is on people's mindsets. As I mentioned earlier, I think almost everybody we speak to at the beginning has an element of concern or worry. If they've never been through that advice process before, they're not really sure what trajectory they're on, whether they're going to be able to stop working at the age at which they want to. And if they do stop, are they going to run out of money before they run out of life, fundamentally? I think the planning process that we go through gives people that clarity. And if they're not on track to where they need to be, we can kind of come up with ideas or suggestions and show them the impact that will have on their plan, so that by the end of the kind of initial advisory process, they are on track to get to where they want to be. The biggest impact that has is people go from a place of concern to peace of mind. I think relief. A lot of the client testimonial videos and feedback certainly that we get from clients is that peace of mind, calmness, and no longer worrying about something that was on their mind beforehand. It's probably the biggest change.
So the ostrich taking its head out of the sand, that kind of, yeah.
Head out the sand and realising that the world...
It's not as scary as you thought it was going to be, I guess. Yeah.
Exactly. It's like going to the doctor. If you, if you go to the doctor to I went to the doctor to look at a mole or something I thought had been bad. He told me I think it was okay, and suddenly that's relief. I think it's a similar kind of vein, but obviously in the financial context.
Tell me a little bit about some of the common mistakes that you see clients making before they speak to someone like yourself. There's
a few. I think one we see quite often is people investing in inappropriate products, essentially. There's a lot, particularly in kind of less well-regulated jurisdictions, you see too good to be true type of investments. So ones that come to mind are no risk, guaranteed 12 to 15% a year returns. Obviously, that's not realistic. And these kind of structures have a tendency to go wrong. We've seen a couple of examples just this year of these kind of products which have lost all their value, and essentially the investors lost all of their money, which obviously has a huge impact on their ability to reach those longer term goals. So we come across that quite a bit. Often people following well-meaning advice from your stereotypical Dave down the pub, whether that's ways to transfer property to kids to avoid inheritance tax or trusts or all kinds of different things. Often that doesn't work. So if it doesn't work, it doesn't provide the solution to the problem that they're trying to fix. It also often incurs unnecessary costs or taxes and actually puts them in a worse position than they would have been beforehand.
Yeah, the other one we were talking before we started about, I've been out for dinner a couple of weeks ago. Not a single person around the table had a will in place. I'm assuming that is an enormous part of the planning that you recommend, and from a taxation point of view, a legacy point of view, very important.
Absolutely. I think kind of protecting people's family is kind of the underpinning of a financial plan. So in terms of wills, there's an amazing number of people that don't have a will at all. So that's one area. For internationally mobile people, there's an extra layer of complexity that if you've got assets in different countries, often it's sensible to have a will for each of those countries. Otherwise, it might take your family 5 years, 10 years potentially to actually go through probate and be able to access that wealth to support them moving forward. But also with kids, I think guardianships, if anything was to happen to somebody in a foreign country, what happens to your kids? In a lot of places, they become wards of the state and essentially go to an orphanage until it can be proved who the legal guardian is, without the right kind of deeds of guardianship in place. So a whole raft of things that need to be considered on the will and estate planning. And linked to that is kind of life insurance, or insurances to make sure that if anything happened to the main breadwinner, the family's still going to be okay and the plan still works. And checking things like, your life cover that you took out when you were living in the UK, for example, is it still valid if you're living in Dubai or the UK or Singapore or elsewhere overseas? So all of these things need to be reviewed just to make sure they're still fit for purpose and that your family's protected if anything were to happen to you whilst living overseas.
As part of your role, you obviously there's the role of a financial advisor, but I know that you work with tax experts, lawyers, fund managers. How do you use all of that to simplify the situation for clients, and what roles do they play?
It's a good question. I think my objective when working with clients is to really simplify things and, as far as possible, give them a single point of contact who's going to be able to do all of that legwork in the background. So it's almost, if you think of like a duck swimming across the surface of a river, serenity on the top and the legs are moving quickly beneath the surface. I think that's the kind of approach we take with clients, in that we can work together with tax experts, investment managers, whoever they might be, will writers, mortgage providers, a whole plethora of people that are really well experienced and knowledgeable about cross-border planning and all of its different guises. Doing that means that we can identify who's needed to answer specific questions, and we're able to identify what those questions are that need to be answered for clients. We can then bring in the relevant professionals that we know are able to answer those questions and that we've vetted, to make sure that they're a good company to work with as well. So that from a client perspective, it's all streamlined. You don't need to be having multiple conversations in different places. You don't need to work out who to speak to where. We can act as that kind of single point of contact and then manage the experts behind the scenes to make sure the client gets the right answers to put them in the best position.
We mentioned tax advisors there. I know we often come across people who perhaps already have a tax advisor, perhaps provided by their workplace. What is the difference between what they might do and what we might do?
It's a very good question, because it's something, working in big international financial centres, a lot of the clients we work with work for multinational corporations, and they'll be seconded or posted to different places around the world with their job. Now, often they will engage with typically a big four accountancy firm to provide advice to that client or support to that client as part of their relocation package. What we tend to find is those tax advisors appointed by the company are really looking out for the company's best interest, and their objective is really to make sure that the client is paying the right amount of tax. Often that might mean the most tax to protect the company. They're not looking at smart ways or planning opportunities for the individual to reduce their tax bill. We take a very different approach, which is we're being employed by the client in order to look at their situation, look at different scenarios and different things that they could do in order to, wherever possible, minimise the implications of any tax. How that might play out with somebody relocating to the UK, for example. If they're leaving Hong Kong or Dubai or anywhere that's low tax, moving to the UK, they will probably tell them about their residency position and whether they'll become resident, but they're not going to look at their personal or private assets and say, for example, you've made a gain here in this fund, you should sell this now whilst you're a Hong Kong tax resident, where you're not going to pay any tax at all, and then do something different in the UK. Instead, they won't comment on that. So an unadvised client will often move to the UK holding things that have made money, and then finding out when they actually come to sell it in the UK, they're getting charged tax in the UK on the entire gain, which they didn't need to do. If they'd have taken action before they left, they could have avoided any of that. So it's a different approach. I think we're looking to be innovative in order to put the client in a better situation than they are now, whereas the company provided advisor is largely looking to make sure that the company's not going to get in any trouble, and that the boxes are ticked in terms of their exit taxes and what they paid.
I'm interested to hear a little bit more about why you like being a financial advisor, and perhaps specifically why you like being a financial advisor at St James's Place. What has made it a successful and fulfilling career?
Where to begin? I think, so for me, what I love about the job is it's a combination of technical problem solving and relationships. And so that appeals to me. I think everyone's situation is different. So in terms of kind of staying intellectually engaged, it means that everyone we're working with, there's constantly things that we need to solve, and it kind of keeps my mind active as much as anything else. From a relationship side, we get to, like I say, walk alongside clients over the long term. I've got clients that I started working with 15 years ago. We're still working together, and we'll still be working together, all being well, for the next 15, 20 years or however long I still have left in me. That's amazing, because you start off on the path together with objectives, then the life happens. Kids come along, they get married, objectives change. Mm-hmm. They decide to move to a different country. There's you never know what's going to come down the line, but you're that trusted advisor, and you get to help people and to update that plan. And at some point, we get to tell them, we get to sit across the table from that person and say, "I've got amazing news. If you want to go to work tomorrow, it's optional. You're in a place where you don't have to do it." And so you've reached independence, and everyone reacts differently. Some people will go in and hand their notice in the next day. can't wait to leave. Other people actually love what they do. But there's a very big difference in waking up and having to go to work and waking up and wanting to go to work. And I think there's not many jobs where you get that privilege to be able to break that news to people.
Remember a few years ago, one of my friends being told by her advisor that she could retire, I think it was 10 years earlier than she thought. Yeah. I mean, life changer. Yeah. Incredible. Great.
Do you want to talk about why it's St James's Place?
Yeah. If you could.
Yeah. I think doing it sort of within or under the umbrella of St James's Place, for me as an advisor, I want to spend my time focusing on helping clients, answering problems and working with people that I like, essentially. Now, there's a lot of work that goes into being able to provide that service. And a lot of it doesn't involve speaking to clients. It's whether it's a regulatory side to make sure that we're being safe and we're following all the regulations that we need to follow, whether it's on the investment side, making sure that we've got an investment proposition that's going to have the best chance of delivering the returns that clients need to reach their goals, whether it's marketing, helping to grow our business and communicate and get our message out to the kind of people that we want to work with. There's a whole range of stuff that I don't have the time or interest in. Frankly, I don't want to spend my time doing that. St James's Place has that infrastructure behind me. That means that we've got really good support in all these areas which are critical to running a good business and providing clients with good client service that I don't need to think about. And it means I can spend my time doing what I like to do, which is working with people, staying in touch and delivering value on that side of things.
You can stick with your problem solving and your relationship building and let the rest of it be handled elsewhere.
Absolutely. As far as possible, yeah. I don't want to be involved. And I think St James's Place provides that platform. It's a big organisation. It's financially strong. You've got processes in place.
Do you ever have situations where people maybe assume the rules are the same in various jurisdictions, or indeed misunderstand the rules? And can you give me a little bit of an example of that?
Yeah, I think often the challenge can come of, when we think of international planning, there's kind of two key jurisdictions. So there's where is the individual based and where is the asset based. Often people think the rules are either the same in each one, or maybe they don't take into account the other jurisdiction. A sort of recent case that comes to mind would be a client who had worked for a US company for most of their career. They've since retired, and they had a large, almost $1 million US dollars worth of company stock in their old company, and it had done pretty well. So they were quite happy sitting on top of it. They didn't need that as part of their retirement funding. And so their plan was to leave that as a legacy to their kids. This person was a UK expat, essentially, been abroad for 30 odd years, and had worked out that they were no longer liable to UK inheritance tax. So they're very happy. They hadn't factored in or weren't aware of is that for non-US people living outside of America, US assets, including US company stock, are liable to US estate taxes, which if they'd have gone through the plan that they had in place would have resulted in their family being liable to at least $400,000 of inheritance tax. Now, just from that one conversation, we were able to highlight that risk and the issue with the plan and set them up with an alternative structure, which allowed them to pass the full value of that legacy down to their kids without any inheritance tax at all. So I think, assuming or don't assume that the rules are the same in one jurisdiction than the other.
I guess the other thing that I suspect happens quite a bit is these rules are continuously changing and evolving. You know, in the UK, you look at it, you're having 2 budgets a year with announcements at almost every budget. Do you often get people coming in with out of date knowledge?
Yeah, all the time. I think when it comes to planning, it's not really a one and done process. So I often say to people that the value is in long term, but doing it regularly. It's a bit like going to the gym in that if you go once, you're probably not going to see the best results. It's about sort of having a structure and regularly reviewing and tracking progress. A great example of that in the UK, as you referenced, is massive changes to UK tax for expats essentially, and what were previously non-doms were introduced at the beginning of this tax year. And the tax planning we would have done if we were having a conversation this time last year before the budget is completely different to the strategy that we'd employ now. The change is actually positive for UK expats. I think that budget was generally seen as a bit of a dark cloud, but UK expats get the silver lining if they are going back in the UK. But it really highlights the importance of regular planning to keep up to date with the rules that are in place now, rather than taking advice as a one-off kind of exercise and then finding a few years later when it's actually needed, that advice is no longer relevant or it's a bit out of date.
You've spoken a little bit about the importance of where you live and the jurisdiction the asset is in. I'm assuming for people with globally mobile lives, it's also what's the jurisdiction they're going to next? What's the jurisdiction they're going to retire in? It's a whole other layer of complexity on top of it.
A huge amount, but also opportunity. So if you take a hypothetical client who's looking to retire in 10 years' time, they might be based in Hong Kong or the Middle East now, but they're not liable to tax. But they might, have 2 options. If they go to Australia to retire, or they might be planning to go to the UK to retire. The advice we're going to give is going to be very different for each of those 2 clients, because the tax implications of doing something are incredibly beneficial in Australia, for example, but actually wouldn't be optimum if they're in the UK, and vice versa. So it's a case of working out where are you now and what's the tax implications, where's the asset now, but as importantly, where are you going to be when you actually start to access that as part of your wider plan? Because all those moving parts need to be aligned in order to get to the best outcome.
Thank you, Stuart, for joining us. If this resonated with you, please do feel free to get in touch. For me, the biggest thing I'm taking away from this conversation is the importance of starting early. The earlier you start to plan, the more options you have. Thank you so much for joining us here on Beyond the Numbers. My name's Zoe Pearson, and I hope to see you next time.